onda, locos? ¿Qué onda, locos? Put yourself in a time period that had both Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and I Am the Walrus just a few years before. Acid Western is just the tip of this movie. The movie is El Topo, and there's not a way to begin unraveling this movie by our standard sense, since it is not linear. So we need a few helping hands. Here are a few books that help guide my way into understanding. El Topo translates over to the mole in English. The movie is a man's spiral progression towards enlightenment, becoming Christed. Not becoming Christ, becoming Christed. This movie changed me after I saw it. I also saw The Holy Mountain afterwards, and I enjoyed the beauty of that movie. But I liked El Topo more. I felt it was stronger, and it had a countercultural reference to Mexico and America's history. Most of this movie can't be shown because of the nature of the thing. Let's start with the history implications of the movie. During the time this movie was created, there were many countries in unrest, and the emergence of postmodernism appeared in common sight. The collective consciousness of struggle made its way for hippies and post-structural philosophers to begin to unravel our normalcy. The attack on Tlatelolco cannot be downplayed here, since it is essential to understanding the false sense of security that we have from those in power. On October 2nd, 1968, university students and high school students met at the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Tlatelolco, Mexico. A total of about 10,000 men, women, and children were there at that time, when they were open fired upon.
Espíritu genocida del gabinete de la Changa Díaz Ordaz fuera tan criminal para hacer esto. No esperábamos esto, no lo esperábamos.
The news came out right afterwards indicating that 44 people had died. But now the news indicates that about 300 to 400 people actually died that day. 33 years later, after the incident occurred, Mexico also indicated that they were the ones that hired the Olympic Battalion. The Mexican government, that is. If I am to explain this movie to you finally, I must say that the meaning behind the symbols is extensive and goes so far as to understand the possibilities behind them. So we must understand the possible implications of all the different types of symbols. Let's start with a quick Cartesian grid of a storyline to write the words that the images show. This will not be like a linear story deconstructed. It will be more like a journey you take with me. Much like how many see the cross as a Christian symbol, it really is just a vertical ternary with a horizontal ternary. The vertical ternary representing ascension towards the heavens, and the horizontal ternary representing man. So in essence, the vertical ternary with the horizontal ternary represents man's ascension towards heaven. You see? The movie begins with a pole. Really, it does. The movie begins with a pole and a man riding a black horse with a boy behind him. That's the first image, and already the possibilities are endless, silly as it may seem. When we read what Jodorowsky said of it, he claims that the pole represents a sundial and the creating of a culture. Let's move forward before we get stuck on this topic. The man tells the boy to bury his favorite toy and a photo of his mother. The man we are going to refer to as El Topo. The intro speaks of moles and their journey to try to burrow out of the ground and into the light, only to finally blind themselves once they see the light.
El topo es un animal que cava galerías bajo la tierra.
The other famous artists I think of when I think of moles are Kafka, those, and I'm one of them, who find even a small, ordinary-sized mole disgusting. Would probably have died of disgust if they had seen the giant mole. Guillermo del Toro.
It looks like a mole. Huh?
Shion Sono and Bukowski.
But my father was a great literary teacher. He taught me the meaning of pain.
Shion Sono will forever remain one of my favorite directors, since one of my favorite movies by him is actually Himizu, which is about normalcy and, well, you could say it's about everything, ranging from good to evil, to growing up, to natural disasters, and to having faith. In Himizu, which is the Japanese word for mole, we see that the main character Sumida wishes he was a mole. Sumida then later on in the movie goes on to kill a bunch of criminals, trying to maintain balance by killing those who deserve to be killed. The main connection I see is the protagonist's journey. And much like Jodorowsky claims, the movie is a journey into the self, insofar as the self exists, that is. Then, El Topo and the boy go to a town drenched in red. The display is not of blood, rather of the color of red. You are immediately bombarded by it, and the symbolism behind it is not a massacre, but the carnage within ourselves. The reflective properties of recording a scene like this from afar makes you a spectator of good and evil, and clearly lets you define the properties within yourself that are tied with that sort of violence. The next scene shows three strange criminals, one who seems to have a foot fetish, the other dressed in Mexican military uniform, slicing a banana into pieces, and the last placing rocks on the ground that make the shape of a woman, only to try to simulate intercourse with that woman. I will refrain from using restrictive terms like deviant, since if we are to use those terms, this whole movie would be deviant, and I know this is not the movie I saw. El Topo gets chased down by the three and murders them. Simple. The last bandit then states it was the colonel who ordered the acts of murder.
Es el coronel.
Then we move forward to where there are 4 more bandits, and they seem reminiscent of the Tlatelolco Olympic Battalion.
Enfrentados por un grupo de hombres armados, cada uno con un guante blanco en la mano izquierda.
Sporadic, and with rapid fire, they shoot civilians. The 4 bandits then have 4 monks tied up. The 4 bandits then dance with the monks, reminiscent of the Dance of the 41, where 41 men were dressed as women and went to a secret location to have relationships with other men. Even now, some Mexicans still hold the value of 41 similar to that of 13 in America, where people skip the age of 41. A woman then leaves the building that looks like a hut in the shape of a pyramid and gets hollered by the men acting like dogs. The bandits each have an iguana that they are riding like a horse. According to Jodorowsky, the iguanas look like prehistoric phalluses. I had just thought this was lunacy, to be honest. The woman from the pyramid then fills the bucket to bring to the colonel who's inside the building. From the Gnostic teaching, we can see that Jesus actually was initiated as a student into the mysteries inside of a pyramid in Egypt. Back to work. So we're at the colonel wearing some red boxers, and the more he gets dressed up, the more power he is given. This is almost to say that the man himself does not have any power. Rather, his clothes, his makeup, his hair have the power. So after he obtains some of that power from the woman, he uses it against her by telling her, "Don't try to guess my actions."
¿Quién te las pidió? No te adelantes a mis deseos.
Once they exit the pyramid, the bandits, upon the colonel's order, are about to assault the woman when El Topo barges in. El Topo shoots one of the bandits. That bandit then tries to take all his treasure to the grave. Another interesting topic is to see the monks smiling at the murder. The colonel and El Topo go to a circle arena, and the scene that follows is closer to a ballet than a western. El Topo pirouettes and shoots the colonel's gun off his hand, and then he shoots the colonel's toupee and clothing, leaving him bald, bare, and ballless, and with the female attributes of makeup and red boxers left. El Topo then claims he is God and castrates the colonel.
¿Quién eres tú para hacer justicia? Soy Dios.
His claim to be God, according to Jodorowsky, is in reference to Sufi al-Hallaj, who indicates he is God, to stipulate that he has his own ideals and he believes them to be correct. According to al-Hallaj, if we are to claim servitude, we are also claiming that we know our master's meaning behind their wishes, and that we are doing specifically their work. The woman then wishes to go with El Topo, and El Topo abandons the boy, saying to him,
Destrúyeme. Ya nunca dependas de nadie.
leaving the boy independent, only to be accepted by the monks. We then are guided to an oasis-like location that will make a callback to the Garden of Paradise. Here the man who is God names the woman Mara, which means bitter water. They head out to the desert and the man digs under the woman's feet to find turtle eggs. Turtles have strong symbolism in Native American tribes. The turtle represents Mother Earth and the water, both of which are played to at the current time, subscribing the water of life as something Mara is, as well as the creator, Eve of all things. El Topo then shoots a phallus rock and a spring of water appears, similar to Moses splitting the rock and giving water to the Israelites. Mara circles El Topo while he is sitting in the center of the circle, as she keeps repeating nothing. El Topo then attacks Mara, Jodorowsky claims orgasm, claims forceful. Jodorowsky has gotten into trouble about the controversy towards this scene. We see the repetition of this master-slave dialect, Hegelian to be exact. Jodorowsky was renowned for saying that the slave does not need a master, but that the master needs a slave. So, the master initially was El Topo, and by dominating Mara, he reverts to the slave. And in turn, Mara becomes the master, stating to him that she doesn't love him. She'll only love him if he kills all the masters.
¿Me amas?
Sí.
Yo no.
Para que pueda amarte, tienes que ser el mejor.
El Topo finally reaches the first master, and is told by the double man, called the double man since the legless man complements the armless man, that he seeks the light in the middle of the day.
Buscas la luz en medio del día.
In order to reach the first master, El Topo must step over a 33 centimeter barrier around the tower. 33 centimeters, like the 33 levels of Freemasonry, or even some people who study symbolism, indicate the two triangles. He uses the ladder to climb up and finds a sheet covering a trapdoor. Underneath he sees the first master, who is blind but has highly developed senses. The journey from everything to nothing is the great journey of many religions and philosophies. Nirvana is just one example. El Topo then creates a trapdoor for the first master to fall through, since he feels he cannot beat the first master on a fair basis. After the first master falls in the ditch, El Topo shoots him. First master can be said to represent the first step in initiation, since Jodorowsky likens him to Christ. And like Jodorowsky claims in El Topo, a book of the film, to be a good Christian, you must kill Christ. This likens the idea of a person not becoming Christ, but rather being Christ in. Not that you are, but rather that you are becoming. A very Gnostic idea. A lot of the attributes given to the first master are symbolic towards Zen meditation. Thich Nhat Hanh, when describing Nirvana, states that Nirvana is the freedom from wrong ideas and perception.
In Buddhism, we speak of Nirvana, which is the cessation of all suffering. That is why Nirvana is first of all the removal of notions of ideas that serve the base of misunderstanding and suffering.
Sí.
No me duele matarte porque sé que la muerte no existe.
The notion of death cannot apply to reality, whether to a cloud or to a human being.
The first master can be seen either as a sheep or a horse. The female El Topo then follows Mara and El Topo. Some claim that she signifies the shadow that Carl Jung speaks about. Then, on the way to the second master, Mara keeps staring at herself in the pocket mirror, given to her by the female El Topo. The way she stares into the mirror will remind you of Narcissus, who stares into a pool. The second master is a more interesting character to me. Jodorowsky describes him as an Essene who surrenders himself to the Universal Mother. I can somewhat see that with the emphasis on accuracy towards all creations. There's a sign that likens this to the journey of the initiate.
Estábamos esperando. Esto dicen las cartas de ti. Vas cayendo, caerás todavía. Cuanto más profunda sea tu caída, más alto llegarás.
The elevation coming from the total deconstruction of the self.
Now I wish to speak to the dead one.
But in the sense, the second master we see being delicate and being strong as one, as something he's trying to describe to El Topo. Once the second master, quote-unquote, kills El Topo,
Boom! Muerto.
Now I wish to speak to the dead one.
He claims to want to speak to the dead man, and teaches him the lessons of being delicate. He says later, perfection is to get lost. In order to get lost, you have to love. In this regard, we are reminded of the Essenes, and their teaching on mercy and work. And again, El Topo tricks the second master by having the mother step on the shards of mirror. One could say reminiscent of the lion in Aesop's fables. And you could also say that the weakness of the woman was the mirror. So the same thing that defeated Mara is also going to defeat the Universal Mother. And then he shoots the second master in the back of the head. El Topo then gets to the third master, who is a Mexican man playing the flute, with beliefs similar to Confucius. He's an extension of the world, claims that El Topo's presence has started to kill all the rabbits. Ironically enough, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who played El Topo, actually killed all the rabbits physically, one by one. So the third master and El Topo point their pistols at each other, and the third master shoots El Topo, and El Topo is protected by copper. Knowingly so, El Topo then shoots the third master. We then see the female El Topo cut out prickly pear open, and lick the spot in between, and try to overtake Mara. We can see this to symbolize sexual power given back to the female, whereas the female El Topo is trying to dominate, and Mara wishes to revert back to female oppression. Mara then offers herself to El Topo, who doesn't really care. Then El Topo meets with the fourth master, who's like a hippie, or as Carl Jung considers, the old wise man, who claims he's exchanged his gun for a butterfly net. The net then blocks the bullet. The fourth master tells El Topo there's no way he could have won. El Topo claims he could have taken his life, to which the fourth master replies,
La vida no me importa. Te lo voy a demostrar.
El Topo, having killed all four masters, screams to the heavens and goes back to the previous places of the masters. The spiritual journey back into the uterus of the Universal Mother is just an idea I saw from that. El Topo then breaks the first tower, and it opens like a lotus flower. Left with nothing, El Topo contemplates suicide. The female El Topo then shoots El Topo, and in an almost in-your-face manner she shoots him accordingly to make him Jesus, by shooting his hands and feet and him displaying stigmata-like figure. Then Mara shoots El Topo in the same spot that the lance did the final stab to Jesus. What's interesting to note here is that once Jesus' blood spilled onto the blind man that stabbed him in the Gospel of John, the man could then see. Since much of the story we see in the movie is the reversal of construction, let us consider that maybe the blood from the lance, in this case, gunshot, helped El Topo see. Part 3.
¿Quién eres tú para hacer justicia? Soy Dios.
El Topo absorbs all the masters to become the blind mole. So then we get a scene where El Topo is sitting down in an almost trance-meditative state. Though El Topo is something else, he now no longer claims to be God, but just a man. El Topo is then reborn by the old woman when she simulates as though she is giving birth to him. And just like a baby, he's born bald. We will still call this man El Topo, since one of the main characteristics of transition is remaining the same. That is to say, one thing we must consider is that change is possible at the highest order, and that we are not bound by ourselves. El Topo is the chosen one that will lead the deformed to live in the city. The city, according to Jodorowsky, is said to coincide with America. The racial tension, the question of victimhood, the obsession of vices, and the esoteric figure of the all-seeing eye being almost worshipped with everyone carrying the image. As you may guess, the all-seeing eye is something we see on the dollar bill. Some claim it to be a symbol of enlightenment, some claim it to be the holy mountain. I'm reminded also of Odin giving up his right eye for the sake of wisdom. The sheriffs in the town have a reversal of characteristics we see in the old cowboys. Jodorowsky may be aligning power with victimhood. That is to say, the freaks, or in this case, the gay sheriffs, have the most power. Although you could challenge this notion for later on in the movie. The sheriffs dress in women's clothes and have no moral guide. They are simply arbiters of the mob rule. And this whole Western scene has almost a sarcastic or sardonic background. El Topo then is determined to clear out the tunnel for the deformed people to get out of the underground and into the light. And the basket on his back, when he's carrying the rocks, is reminiscent of Diego Rivera's The Flower Carrier. The cacti from earlier is also reminiscent of Diego's work. Then, as a play of the snake handlers in the 60s, we see the preacher in his church play Russian roulette to show God's favor. Which is all fine and good, until the new monk that came into town puts a real bullet and a little boy shoots himself. One of the sheriffs looks like John Tron. El Topo then has to sleep with a small woman for exhibitionist purpose, in order to make money. Once El Topo and the small woman go to the church, the friar recognizes El Topo and tries to kill him, since he was the little boy El Topo abandoned a long time ago. The friar then goes on to have the earlier costume that El Topo was wearing, but cannot get himself to kill El Topo, since he states, "I cannot kill my master." Once again, it is the master who needs the slave, and not the slave who needs a master. In one of Jodorowsky's statements, he says that masters are asking to be killed, that they wait their whole life waiting for someone to defeat them. With that regard, we can see that El Topo has just been waiting for someone to take him. In the same regard though, we can see that the fourth master, who was not defeated by El Topo, had to find a way to alleviate himself of that issue. So in essence, he shot himself for that purpose, since El Topo could not kill him. Because if no one kills him, he'd live forever.
It's not as classical metaphysics thinks. We are too terrified to accept the fact that we are mortal beings, we would like to be immortal. No. The truly horrible thing is to be immortal. This, I think, is, for all of us, the most obscene threat that we witness. We don't want our fathers alive. We want them dead.
At the end of the movie, we see that all the freaks leave the underground and get killed by the people from the city, or the Americans. Freaks here is in reference to how one of Jodorowsky's bigger influences was the movie from the 1920s called Freaks, in which the people of the circus are not seen as fragmented, but rather as powerful. Powerful enough to destroy the character at the end. You must question what it is meant that the townspeople kill the underground people, since you would think that that would almost be playing the normalcy of the situation. El Topo as a monk goes insane, and begins to shoot the people in the town, and then goes to set himself on fire. Reminiscent of the Buddhist monk who set himself on fire, as an abdication for all the pointless deaths. And it is also reminiscent of what we were speaking about the master-slave idea, in which the slave did not kill the master, so the master needs to die somehow. So he sets himself on fire in order to die. At the end of this journey, we see the honey on all the gravestones. And much like the medium looking back at you through this movie, you can feel the spiritual work you put into it. So I believe the honeycomb, at the end of the movie, is for your spiritual progress, the viewer. So, you made it all the way here. You put in the work. You followed me on that spiral staircase to enlightenment. And we're here to discuss some of the funner concepts that could or could not be correct. Jodorowsky is like an alien, but he doesn't speak in mathematics, he speaks in symbols, such as honey, triangle, beat, which is to say, your spiritual work yields your soul. There's a claim that the connection of understanding without understanding and intuition is central to the concept of the movie. So that is to say, the same reference we spoke about the cross. That the cross, even though it represents Christ, we understood it before it represented Christ, that it had a holy connotation even before it had a holy purpose. Let's start with the symbolism of each master. So each master can actually represent a specific animal. The first master represents the white horse that he rides. The white horse is the symbol of Christ. Jodorowsky also in interviews indicates that the first master could also be considered the most enlightened. The second master is a lion, the third master is a rabbit, and the fourth master is a butterfly. I know, there's no butterfly, but he considers it the shadow of the butterfly in some interviews. You can also say that the masters lower their weaponhood and their shelter throughout, so that the first master has a brick octagonal tower, and he has 2 pistols with multiple bullets. The second master has a wooden wagon, 1 pistol, and multiple bullets. The third master has a straw house, 1 pistol with 1 bullet, and the last master has no house and no pistol. And as I've been writing this script, I started to consider them. Maybe he makes them less enlightened throughout. So that is to say that the first master he kills is the most enlightened, which is the mole. Then they closely go down in understanding. The first time I saw it, I thought that he was referencing the different countercultures. So I thought he was referencing different locations. I read that similar idea in one of the books I'm currently reading, which is talking about the counterculture of cinema, the cinema of cruelty, in which the first master represents the Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and the second master represents Sufism. The third master represents the old Mexican third world peasant farmer that is centralized to hippies or countercultural references. And the fourth master represents the supposed homeless, or I don't know, someone who gave it all up. Oddly enough, the masters actually digress in the house. So it almost seems like a reversal of the 3 little pigs idea. So we have the first house is brick, second is wood, third is straw, and the fourth is nothing. That is to say, it's progression towards nothingness. You could also display that as nirvana, but I don't think that's what he was going for. I think he was going for a deconstruction of the element. Some of the strongest symbolism we see actually is one of the first images we see, which is the pole. According to Rene Guénon and Jodorowsky, the pole is said to represent the beginning of all culture, the beginning of all worlds. One of my favorite authors, J.E. Serlo, even describes something as simple as a triangle to represent malehood, to represent the phallus, to represent change and fire. So if we imagine the female's anatomy, it would be the upside down triangle, and it's said to represent water and the total opposition of the male. So anytime I see a six-pointed star, I'm reminded of the two forces working together, becoming one. And similarly enough, the Ankh in Egyptian mythology is said to represent Isis and Osiris as one. The movie itself also tries to recall the Tlatelolco massacre by questioning civility and catharsis. El Topo shoots the bandit, and one begs to question whether violent catharsis is at play. Like whether or not violent catharsis was a requirement for a counterculture that screamed for peace. So the journey of violent catharsis may allow for vicarious living. Once again, these are just ideas. If you have different ideas, that's fine. It's like Bill Hicks said, life is just a ride.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud. And it's fun for a while. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride.
After watching El Topo, I decided to watch The Holy Mountain. And to be honest, I liked El Topo more. The movies are connected, though one represents the ascension of being Christian as well as the allegorical to the reality, while the other deconstructs reality, Freemasonry, and identity. One of the things Jodorowsky says in an interview is that many directors and artists bring dreams into the waking life, whereas he brings the waking life into dreams. Oddly enough, a few days ago, I had this strange dream of this giant mole encased in lava that was larger than the Superman ride at SeaWorld. I don't ask, right? And to be honest, I think maybe I just read a little too much. I've been reading a lot on The Giant Mole, The Village Schoolmaster, Franz Kafka. So maybe that's it. I always remember this one thing that the Rosicrucians have on their logo. And it's a circle that says try. And I think when you're watching movies like this, it's important to acknowledge, to try to understand. So I'm Mexican Chuy, and hasta mañana, locos. That was a decent run. I think it was pretty decent. Let's cut.
Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real?
That her world wasn't real.
Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Tranquilo. Abre los ojos.
Wake up.
I am the hologram of the totem around which my desires, drives, and dreams congregate. I am the literary artifice which allows them to put aside their differences and achieve some sort of functioning union. I, as such, do not exist. Never say never. But October 9th, I finally decided to go through with it. So here it is, part 2 of the Mexican Cinema of Darkness. What's up, crazies? The movie we're going to be talking about today is called La Mansión de la Locura, or The Mansion of Madness, or Dr. Tar's Torture Dungeon. The movie was directed by Juan Lopez Montezuma, who helped in the production of El Topo.
When he sees the sun, he is blinded.
And worked a lot on Radio UNAM.
Yo estoy convencido, pero no trato de convencer.
Under Panorama of Jazz. The movie follows the same schematics of the System of Dr. Tar and Feather by Edgar Allan Poe, and recently a sort of remake was made in English, which is called Stonehurst Asylum with Ben Kingsley.
Madness, you say? How dare you accuse me of madness in front of my own staff?
The movie follows a man's journey into the asylum. When they brought over this movie to America, they called it Dr. Tar's Torture Dungeon. That title really exemplifies the issues with much American cinema, the sensationalism of everything, I suppose. The director, Juan Lopez Montezuma, is a large inspiration to Guillermo del Toro. In the movie, we follow a man named Gaston LeBlanc, who goes to the insane asylum in order to study the famous soothing system. LeBlanc in English means the white. To be honest, my brain resides in two locations. LeBlanc means nothing, but as soon as I think of the white, I remember Lord of the Rings and Gandalf and how he went from being Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White after falling into the depths of darkness and defeating that Ifrit like Balrog. The movie also flows like Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe's movies.
Dr. Craven?
While on the way there, Gaston gets stopped between a flamboyant soldier. Perhaps it's a reference to Jodorowsky of the power of removing the exertion of dominance from the soldiers. Then once Gaston meets Dr. Maillard, he sees Eugenie, who he falls in love with. Dr. Maillard shows Gaston around his asylum, where we find Mr. Chicken, a man who squawks, walks, and talks like a chicken. Dr. Maillard feeds him some seed and explains a little more on the soothing system, which allows all the patients to be fed into their desires. Aleister Crowley said it best when he sold the hedonistic satanic ideals, which are to do as thou wilt. Before insanity was seen as good or bad, and shamans and priests of the Aztec Empire were heroes. There were lepers who were sent off to sea. Yet now we ascribe the untouchable diagnosis to those with mental illnesses. But in order to grasp better understanding, let's embark on that ship of fools and deep dive into the ocean of light. Chapter 2. Like the twin-tailed siren calling the sailors to game in themselves, so too are we somewhat dazzled by the possibility of psychosis. By studying murder movies and shows like Dexter, not your normal subjectivist philosophy you had seen around the 70s, but rather a reversal of characteristics. In Michel Foucault's book, Madness and Civilization, we see the development of madness becoming. The title of the book was previously The History of Madness, such that considering madness as a progression of modernity. For how long did our societies revolve around mysticism? Our perception went from seeing those with madness as they imagined their world as another world to a non-world. We now consider the shaman psychotic and determine the subjective from objective standards.
What is unique to psilocybin is that overlaid over what I just described is, big surprise, a voice.
With the establishment of postmodernism, everyone has their own moment in the sun. Everyone 15 minutes of fame.
Spent 50,000 on a bagel, and it came with a bagel.
But how many times must Icarus fly under the sun, only to realize his wings were made of wax? Those we consider insane have long developed into those hyper-fascinated or obsessed with what modernism would consider mundane. Our capability to adapt is our primary signifier of sanity. We see the things we do each day, from messaging people all around the globe, to listening to music anytime you want, and we consider it plain as day. We normalize the deviant and accept what seems to be unacceptable. We move through movements like water, not once begging to ask the layers of hidden information underneath. In Mansion of Madness, Dr. Maillard describes to Gaston a machine that is being built. He describes it as such.
A metallic womb uniting man to the universe.
This situation of the Electro-Sphinx metallic womb reminds me of the rebirth obsession in Fallout 3 when the Church of Adam is created. Perhaps the only difference between those insane and sane is that dazzlement. Can you say that some of those called insane have just been awoken to a new reality dismembered by modernism? We're so quick to worship technology or ourselves. We're so quick to worship work. But those insane have something else in mind, either a sort of sociopathic ideation or the dream of being a chicken. There's so much that tells us to close our eyes when it is too much. The only difference is the insane don't listen to that voice. They open their eyes to the possibility of the irrational. There is no binary between reason and insanity. From the counterculture transforming itself into the current culture, the albatross takes many shapes which allow us to feel in control. Like a noose a man carries around with him, or the burden of privacy while carrying a phone with cameras constantly spying, maybe the insane are just quicker to forget. Chapter 3. Our memory keeps us sane. The idea that we are not the reincarnation of Jesus, rather we are just a man.
Who are you biblically?
I'm Jesus Christ, man.
We are not what we dream up, but what we remember about ourselves. In Mansion of Madness, there is a clip in which Gaston indicates he is afraid of heights, to which Maynard replies,
Confess I'm rather clumsy at this type of sport.
Strong emotions prevent madness. Fortunately, you're far from such an ailment.
If we are to consider strong emotions, would they not be exactly madness? Love is madness. To be madly in love with someone? Or anger? I am crazy with hate. The soldiers on top of the tower then teased Gaston by swinging the ladder. The movie will get you forgetting what you just saw on the basis of the next second being entirely disconnected from the previous. My personal favorite absurdist moment was when
Dr. Maillard. But let's stop these games. I'm not as simple or as innocent as that lamp.
the doctor then shows Gaston a man named Dante, who recants the story of the Divine Comedy, and they head into the room with Eugenie, who dances and claims that it is indecent to rest. We'll discuss further the notion of sleeping sanity, but we see her do a ritualistic dance similar to what we see in a Jodorowsky film, with the necessary phallus of course, as well as some hippies above. And throughout the dance, Eugenie describes the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, speaking about the albatross around the man's neck. Much like the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, we place that albatross on our necks, only to stipulate, this is me now. The anchor that weighs upon our necks carries with it nostalgia, obligation, regret, and the nightmare of history. I am the cursed thing in front of you, and that ground of humility is what one may call sanity. For if one took it off, they might think they're Jesus, or the reincarnation of Hitler, or maybe that they saw aliens. And yet that hint of insanity we see in others, we have in ourselves. The claim to rationalization is a reinforced tactic based on memory, or the repetition of acknowledgement that those things, the things we imagine, cannot be real. My dreams just carry spurts of information throughout the day. I only have 5 senses, or that I am awake are only facades of the insanity underneath.
Sergeant, did just give you any instructions about what you were supposed to do tomorrow? Tomorrow? What, today, Thursday? Today's Thursday.
Chapter 4. Eugenie then comes to Gaston in a dream and asks him to save her. While Gaston is walking out, the doctor tells him to stay. Gaston won't listen, to which Dr. Maillard says he has 3 shadows. Of course, he only has 1, but then 2 random men appear, ergo casting 3 shadows. The line he indicates, though, is more important than the scene.
Fear not, for your shadows will protect you.
Here we must consider the 3 parts of Sigmund Freud's theoretical framework, which is the superego, the id, and the ego. The 3 main parts of the conscious and subconscious self entail with it a sort of sanity. Here is why Dr. Maillard would say something like, shadows will protect you. They bound you to the ground and make you remember where you are. Another claim of memory as sanity. But what is the soothing system exactly? Is it not just hedonism? An obsession with solipsism? This whole each to his own mentality that Aleister Crowley used to say, do as thou wilt as the whole of the law? And throughout the movie we see the questionable dichotomy of white with reason and black with madness. Some books have stated such to me that is the main emphasis throughout the film, but to me that seems just a bit too simplistic, which is why both Gaston and Dr. Maillard are using black and white clothes. I don't know how much that I can say I would consider reason to be white, or insanity to be black. All I know is this movie begins heading into Monty Python territory relatively fast. Eventually though, Dr. Maillard, who we know now is Fragonard, a psychotic man who took over the asylum by locking up the sane and letting the mad run wild. Well, Fragonard captures Gaston, and in a scene where both Gaston and Fragonard have togas that are white, which is reason, I suppose. To me, it's just once again that the black and white dichotomy are merely there to confound or are just ambiguously represented. Fragonard then changes into a soldier-like regalia, with a necklace and the sun lingering as a pendant, and some madman then acts as though he's performing intercourse on an animal. It may feel justifiable to say that reason and reason alone can be the deciding factor of status. But does not reason also encompass the sins of the past? Are we not to imagine that some psychotics make it to the top, of some sociopaths could be the best stockbrokers or CEOs, readily able to feel no empathy towards the people that they would hurt? As Herbert Marcuse observed, it may be justifiable, logically as well as historically, to define reason in terms which include slavery, the Inquisition, child labor, concentration camps, gas chambers, and nuclear preparedness. And I know.
Facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings.
But forget for a second any political semblance or meaning derived from religion, and just consider this. Why do we seek kings? Why does insanity and sanity seem like polar opposites? Why does someone have more credibility than another? Is it not in the past? Is it not their status? I have honestly come to believe that we all just wish to go back to sleep, back to the unawareness of childhood, where meaning is imposed by a signifier decided by us. You know, whenever it rained severely in my hometown, my grandmother would take us to the first room in our small Mexican house and say, pray, praying in the dark, without any lights or TV or radio on. And she would say, because God is raining down anger. The angrier the storm, the angrier God was, specifically at the sinners. And as traumatizing as that may seem to some people, it felt comfortable to give all control away, which is a normal trait to a certain extent you can imagine with humans. Wishing to be part of the in-group is the same device that calls us to be part of a family, religion, business, or profession. I think humans just wish to go back to sleep. Chapter 5. The Sleeping Machine. Here's where it all comes together. Not the triumph of reason, but the loss of reason.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time.
At the end of the movie, we see Fragonard take his place as king, dressed with the Argentinian Sol de Mayo, with a white soldier's uniform. He then summons some crows to dance, and then one gets shot. Perhaps on a play on Edgar Allan's Poe's The Raven. Fragonard then gets shot by a woman who claims Viva la Revolution, or Vive la Révolution. I suppose to be reminiscent of the French Revolution. The element of sarcasm at the end when Fragonard says, "Can this be the end of Dr. Maillard?" is a play on Little Caesar. Afterwards, the epilogue has Gaston speaking about the things he has seen in the asylum, but the lingering feeling of doubt seems to stay on the mind. I suppose it is to say we can never truly be sure of who, what, and where we are. Here's where the concept of sleeping really makes me wonder. When you see an anime like Naruto, which the ultimate Madara wishes to place all people in a genjutsu state to constantly be happy, we're sold the concept of the American dream. We are told we should believe the experts that are assigned to us, instead of being told to do our own research. The idea of hedonism, with a sense moral subjectivism, leads me to believe that the easiest sheep to herd is the one that thinks it's different by doing the same, but seeing it in a different perspective. I understand we are not sheep, but consider this. Why are we sold on the concept of immediate gratification of capital to work until we die? Why did the workplace become the church where you attend rituals for 5 days a week, sometimes more? Where you have Holy Communion of coffee being the blood of Jesus and donuts being the bread? I can no longer act like I don't see these lines. The faith in machines has allowed us to start intimate relationships. With the images on your phone, in your screen, or in your car, we eat like the tube, we drink like the tube, we dress like the tube.
This is mass madness, you maniacs! In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion.
Maybe one day we'll wake up and wonder, where have I been? Right when we are dazzled with the reality outside, we will be immersed back into the dream state. Wake up, O sleeper. There's something here. The room is bright, and if you close your ears to the loudness, you will see. It's already sunlight outside. It almost swallowed me. I didn't find joy in games, movies, or things. Drowning in isolation, trapped in your own mind, it can feel pitch black. As above, so below. Alucard is a movie that shows the two sides of the Dark Age, a story of medicine side by side with religion, alongside watching two young girls who believe themselves to be sisters of Satan. The movie is based on the 1872 novel by Joseph Le Fanu and has some of the only ASMR that will make you uncomfortable enough to be scared. The camera is usually the eye of the director, trying to convey a meaning or image. The camera shifts from the eyes of the director to the eye of Alucarda, and we get to see in an almost stop-and-go motion her relationship with Justine flourish in what seems to be like the blink of an eye. With the cinema of poetry, there is no you or me, only we, for we are many.
My name is Legion, for we are many.
Vaselina Salo is a great example of how a message can be skewed by ideology, by showing how our tinted lens of ideology can create something that is not there.
Devil's representative comes to the people having a good time there and tells them, listen guys, now we will be for a quarter of an hour observed by heaven. So please pretend that you suffer.
Directed by Juan Lopez Montezuma, we get a reframing of a vampire movie prototype. Juan Lopez Montezuma really paved the way for someone like Guillermo del Toro. Even in the DVD from Mundo Macabre, you could see that Guillermo del Toro has a few good things to say about him.
I remember to this day as a child, my favorite program was a program that he used to introduce at night, and it was mostly silent film. And so he was a very important formative figure in my personal life, you know.
Alucard has all the vampire powers without the blood sucking. The movie begins by following Justine, who is a sort of innocent, quiet orphan. Alucard shows up in an almost perfect pitch black with her face only visible. The name Alucard can easily be seen as a reversal of the word Dracula. As well as throughout the movie, we get many close-ups on the eyes to play off that vampirical hypnosis. The movie begins and she automatically starts talking about her secrets. She really doesn't know when to stop, so she quickly calls Justine her sister.
Let's find more secrets.
¿Quieres que seamos hermanas?
Then, as if we are inside of a grim fairy tale, Justine dresses in a Little Red Riding Hood costume, while Alucarda playing the part of the big bad wolf dressed in black. Honestly, the bending of perspective from subjective to objective or from camera to character, makes it difficult to tell reality from fantasy. The secrets of Alucarda are amulets. Like the symmetry of alchemy, there's always an equal takeaway from something that is given. Libido transfers from sexual energy to physical energy, and sadomasochism is displaced. The whole place is draped in red when Alucarda runs away to her familiar feeling, as the camera always looks upon them, judging by these silent ideologies. The situation reminds me of Santa Teresa de Avila's, or Saint Teresa de Avila's interior castle. And as we walk around it, perhaps we may never know what's inside. Ouroboros, Tiamat, Buddha, Hermes, Quetzalcoatl. The song goes on forever. Charles Deleuze describes two representations of madness in movies. One which shows madness as a nightmare, and the other that shows it as a daydream. Here in this movie we see Justine is stuck in a nightmare state, while Alucarda frolics throughout this haze as though she is in a daydream. Later on they find themselves in the catacombs-like structure. Alucarda claims her love for Justine, which I'm super confused, since they've only known each other for 13 minutes. But maybe how God's time is different. Perhaps 13 days has been like 13 years.
I'm Alucarda. My name is Justine. Would you die for me? I love you so. I have never been in love with anyone, and never shall, unless it's with you.
Iconoclasm is the destruction of precious symbols, and has always seemed like a tool of postmodernism. My thought is that it delineates from our quick-to-worship neural genetic programming, or rather this shortcut mentality that allows us to live with filling-in-the-blank idealism. A good example of iconoclasm comes from this movie, when they decide to show the ridiculous amount of Jesus on a cross, that look closer to the carcasses of meat in a freezer in a butcher shop. These carcasses remind me of the potato Jesus in Holy Mountain, and how he literally was the starch that fed the man. Later in Alucarda, Justine faints in the church and Alucarda stays caring for her. Then Alucarda freaks out acting like a witch while Justine is crying crazily. Alucarda grabs the cross while the sounds of moaning are in the background. This movie is a bombardment on your auditory sense. I spoke about the possibility of a sort of neurological connection between audio and horror in the Curlian frequency, but the screams in this movie are closer to a psychological torture. As well, I thought that El Topo was intense with nudity, but in this movie it's a different kind of nudity. Something disturbingly vulnerable. Somewhere in the middle you start to feel bad for Alucarda and Justine. They knew no other reality besides one duality, of good and evil. This is why I think the trances like those Alucarda has come almost as second nature. In one of these trance-like states, Justine screams in true shock and is stunned while Alucarda is kissing her blood. Then the gypsy woman introduces them to the witch-like covenant. We see the mirror reflection of the nuns with the witches, when the nuns simulate orgasm while yelling for Jesus at the same time that the witches are summoning the demons. The transference of sexual energy. One could say that sexual energy is never not used, but just converted into something else that mimics it.
The important thing is, we're awake now.
The interesting part is at the peak of the ritual, the fortune teller gets her neck sliced, and on the other side, the nun is levitating. There's something very Anton LaVey about this movie, or rather Aleister Crowley, amidst the properties of we know better than God.
God, with his lack of knowledge, does not understand this truth.
Lies a deep-rooted obsession with carnal desire, with blood. Grotesque and Gothic blood magic has an esoteric tradition that many have spoken of in the past, in part because people believe themselves to have the magic within themselves. Blood also made its way along with people like Elizabeth Bathory, who believed that if she was bathed in blood herself, she would stay young forever. Vlad Dracul, whom Dracula is named after, used to impale his enemies and drink from a cup with red liquid, and some thought that to be blood, but was most likely just red wine. Even in Catholicism, the blood of Jesus grants eternal life. I think it's important to note that sexual energy is a debatable topic in and of itself. So some believe that we should contain that energy, while others believe we should control that energy. And even some more extravagant others teach to worship it or dismiss it entirely. In an interview posted in the DVD, Juan Lopez Montezuma speaks about the link between madness and eroticism, and he considers Alucarda not to be the villain, but rather the real monsters being those who try to stop her from living out her vampirism. So with regards to sexual energy, I assume Montezuma would believe our stigmatized nature of the compression of sexuality can lead to certain bad habits, can lead to bad results. The movie's further iconoclasm has the nuns dressing in blood. Alucarda points out a central thesis to the film's subconscious layer by stating that the nuns and priests worship death.
You call yourself blessed and believe in the heavenly armies and worship death. I worship life. You worship death. I love Justine. You love to kill.
Something that can be said about the ideal of worshipping the next life. Not to mention the fact that at times Alucarda and Justine look like the ones full of life, while the garb that the nuns wear are constantly bloodied up and appear distraught, similar to mummies. The doctor uses leeches to remove blood, and the priests and nuns self-flagellate for a while. Here there's more emphasis on the idea of blood representing eroticism, when we see the pleasure that one must question that the priest may feel after a certain normalization of deviance, or even the law of diminishing returns, the literal beating out of sexual urges as the camera looks upon them from above. And in Doyle's green words, it also implies God himself is voyeuristically enjoying the spectacle. The movie then becomes sort of a fun exploitation, with Alucarda becoming the anti-hero. The church members decide to give Justine an exorcism, except the exorcism looks closer to human torture than spiritual torture. The priest then stabs Justine while the nuns are wailing, and the doctor comes in too late, but he does manage to save Alucarda in time.
I'm taking this girl with me before you kill her, as you killed Justine.
The doctor then takes Alucarda and leaves her at his house. Alucarda meets Daniela, who's the doctor's daughter. After a nun is beheaded, yes, you heard right. The doctor then finds out that the priests were saying the truth. There are demons. So he relapses into religion and trades in his medical equipment for spiritual equipment. So to speak, the transfers of energy again. From a medical encyclopedia, stethoscope, and medicine vials, to a Bible, rosary, and holy water. We once again see that the blood is the life source. When the doctor and his nuns go to the grotto to find Justine in the bloodbath, Justine seems to be reborn out of the blood into a vampire, and when the doctor sprays the holy water, she burns. The clash between magic and reason, or rather modernism and myth, leads us to the end.
We will begin that journey some propitious evening, where I will lead you back into the past and relate to you why this land was called Albion, and why Britain. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless each and every single one of you.
In religion, we are constantly told that your prize is coming tomorrow, oftentimes leading to a sacrifice of today for tomorrow. One must wonder whether this investing mentality was placed so others could focus on the finish line, while some can see the race step by step. In this movie, there are moments that pay off to that finish line, and that is the ending. The emerging collapse when Alucarda is able to make people start catching fire. The auditory portion here may have you lowering the volume, since there is so much screaming in this portion, we do get torturous sounds. While Alucarda begins to burn the grotto down, the nuns bring up the dead nun in a crucified manner, and the movie ends with Alucarda's body disappearing. The last thing we see and hear is the crackling flames burning, with Juan Lopez Montezuma listed as the director in the end. In the movie Alucarda, we see trade-offs of one for another. the sadomasochism of self-flagellation so as to resemble the orgy of the witches, orgasm to one, levitation to another, and science that turns to religion for answers.
This could only be, as you say, the work of what you call the devil.
Yes.
There's a strong calling here from technique to magic, something that makes us feel not so empty, a certain meaning or moral depicted by some sort of ideation. Auguste Comte, a sociologist, once said societies go from religious to metaphysical to philosophical. And I think statements like this have always made me fascinated by things like shamans, or seen a correlation to consider them modern day prophets. This is just a question of wonderment, not one to be taken too serious.
1,000.
In some Catholic societies, there's glossolalia, better known as speaking in tongues. I used to research so much into glossolalia, which I thought would be a sort of language that speaks in cosmo-consciousness. Even now I wonder how someone like Siguros has made me reconstruct the way I see reality with morphemes or meaning, being worshipped rather than the phonemes, which are sounds. Which made me wonder whether the post-structuralist or postmodern have benefits into using the areas of the brain that are not primarily used in technic, logical, or materialist society. Right brain ideals, so to speak. The spirits or collective consciousness may yell, scream in our face, but how are we to hear it if it is perceived as something else? I have heard so many tell me they don't believe in ghosts, but believe in other things. We idolize and worship meaning, but still wonder things like what is intuition or charisma? The signifiers must be signified, and so many wish for someone else to signify them. The Bible, the dictionary, the DSM-5, Google are all prescriptions that were once description of things. In Doyle Green's writing, he speaks of Alucarda as the ghost of Tlatelolco. But if that is the case, then I'm to believe in ghosts.
Now the mystic, what he tries to do is he understands what I'm talking about, and that God is not remote, God is not far away, and God is not superior or higher. God is speaking with you every minute of every second of every day.
Repeat.
Find somebody that feels like they're fucked in some way, and you want to speak to that. You want to speak to that feeling. Hey, wake up! Wake up! I do it sometimes when we talk about issues that I've had in real life. If I talk about like a specific problem that I've had, getting fired from my job or being poor or homeless or whatever, any stupid shit that we've gone over. You've been brainwashed!
Lesson 1. Shock.
Imagine waking up one day and realizing that you were born on a completely different planet. And everything you learned was lie, and your country's history was so fabricated, and everyone around you was so brainwashed. And the heroes you worship were actually monstrous villains. This is like the plot to a science fiction novel, but it's the insane reality for North Koreans like me.
Have to dig it. Oh yeah, that's where you're gonna find us in a minute here. They've got those in Arizona too.
If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace.
The Democratic Party is a replacement church. It's like a cult.
The Republican Party has become a death cult.
The only conclusion they can come to is that this was some sort of insane supernatural cult.
The Republican Party, however, is a death cult.
Pain's not bad. It's good. Step from your wheelchair. Begin to step from your wheelchair. Try it. Just try it. Just try it.
I turned in an instant and said, this is more than a kooky group. This is a crazy group, a criminally insane group. And it's not just Raniere.
Luke Hauser had all of his followers believing that he was centuries old and that his body was inhabited by angels.
Here are the bleaches, the cleansers, whole length of breeze, soaps. I'm not beginning to enumerate all of it.
And it came to pass that I once spent a whole summer drinking 2 Rockstar energy drinks and eating Pop-Tarts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and reading the Bible about 12 to 15 hours a day. I read that book front to back that summer. I have spent time both in cults, that of conspiracy theory and that of religion.
Take it! Take it! Take it!
I've studied brainwashing for years, from seeing the chemical structure of aspartame, which is the chemical found in Diet Coke, matched closely to that of tyrosine or dopamine. Reading on GMOs and plants, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the origins of superstitions, to now reading on different aerosol protection from masks, on the basis of micron size. It is refreshing to see others start using Google Scholar and researching their ideas, but I hope that they just read more than just the abstract. Although I'm not here to bully anyone, or on anything really, since I'm technically here to review a film long overdue, and how it relates to the Mexican experience. From the start, I also know that there's a common thread or movement away from monotheistic religions in America to toward deconstructing of the ideologies that were more prevalent in the past. RedTube, anti-SJWs, and politics entering the scene as their own strong ideology has shown a more humanitarian, or dare I say,
utilitarian. That flavor of consequentialism is my favorite, yes.
Also, I would say that the parsing of the same religion is in part derived from the distinction of cultural identities. But I know that this is nothing new. I'm merely saying this to show you a direction of reflective properties that our society has finally placed. If it could be said in a better way, I feel like we've always had a mirror to see ourselves. But as time has passed and our connection into the void known as the internet has grown, the mirror is now cleaner than ever, of smudges and stains of the past, and we can now identify many of our own imperfections. This episode is an ocean's dive into the blue depths of the mind. We will discuss personality psychology, hypnotism, the new era of nihilism, parasocial relationships a little bit, cults, a little even Pavlov, suicidal fascism, the Leviathan, and the movie Guyana, which is the story of the People's Temple. I admit here that part of the delay as to why this review took so long is that I kept rewatching Guyana Tragedy, the story of Jim Jones. I understand how embarrassing this is, but it really exemplified the difference between a film and an exploitation film. There are so many movies created on the story of Jim Jones. The story of Jim Jones is one that is known of many, and to those of you who don't know, this is where the saying drinking the Kool-Aid comes from. And as many have pointed out to me, it was Flavor-Aid, not Kool-Aid. If you have belonged to a strong connection of any sort, and I mean any sort, from cults or Christian radical ideologies to political ideologies, to even something like belonging to a fan base for a band, like the Mad Infestation into the band Neutral Milk Hotel. Even something like from the worshipping of the Beatles to the boy bands of the 90s. I once belonged to a Christian group that was incredibly obsessed with speaking in tongues. Initially, I thought it was about following the Bible, so I was definitely the only one in the group who was trying to pick in schizophrenics and homeless people off the streets, like Jesus did. And I will never forget what my preacher told me when I brought in that Russian man who claimed that the Russians were following him. He said, "Chewy, what were you thinking? We have women here. You have to protect them." Which, needless to say, had me confused since I thought Jesus led the prostitutes and sinners. But I was young. Let us begin here, with exploration versus exploitation. René Cardona Jr. was known as one of the most prominent low-budget exploitation filmmakers, son of the great Mexploitation director, René Cardona Sr., whose films included Santo contra los Monstruos. Santo films are worth a watch. Laughs are necessary for life. A good English example of this type of movie is Monster Brawl, where it's just WWE in a movie universe. But in comparison to the Santo films, where the character's taken serious, something like See No Evil is a better representation, which is just Glenn Jacobs, better known as Kane, mimicking the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Leatherface. Exploitation films are films that jump on a trend, so similar to See No Evil jumping on the psycho killer trend during that time. Exploitation films in general jump on current trends, or sex, violence, and drugs, generally considered cheap B movies. In this case, the movie is not mexploitation, but rather just an exploitation film. Since what makes something mexploitation is generally using the elements of Mexican culture that are stereotypical, and I think we all know what those are, like narco cultura, money, crime, and sex, of course.
Please, Father, have mercy. God has mercy. I don't.
Guyana Crime of the Century is a drama based on the true story of the People's Temple. Guyana is one of Rene Cardona Jr.'s first movies made without his father. Some of his other films exemplify the way he looked at things and allow you to almost see through his lenses. In one exploitation film he created, called Survive with an exclamation mark, it retells the story of a rugby team's plane crash. In contrast, the distinction of American cinema named a film of the same story, Alive. One depicting the willingness to live while the other depicting what we would do not to die. The idea is depicted further in what I stated in the review of The Platform, where the American title is The Platform, but in the Spanish version it is called El Hoyo, which references the hole. In a true exploitative manner, the film is released close to a year after the event occurred, and has characters with names that are almost sarcastically named thus. The name changes where, for protection, still it holds the same joking manner. Leo Ryan turns into Leo O'Brien, Jim Jones turns into James Johnson, and Dr. Larry Shaw turns into Gary Shaw. The appropriate shock value perfected begins the movie with a suicide. The man is not identified, but it is said to have been Michael Prokes, who was a spokesperson for Jim Jones, who committed suicide that day. The movie then transitions to Jim Jones speaking in a white suit, white tie, with sunglasses on, looking like Elvis. Throughout the past few decades, there has been a reversal of depictions, or doing diagnostics on villains or bad guys of sorts. We have tried to analyze why bad guys are bad guys.
You are bad guy, but this does not mean you're bad guy.
You ever imagine that maybe something you believe has been skewed by something someone once told you incorrectly? Something like, this world is not your home. After providing the appropriate shock value to the system, what some call a breaking point, here's where we get into lesson 2 of brainwashing. Lesson 2. White knight brainwashing. Now, the main reason I think it is important to develop our frame of mind is to be able to see the connections, to catch when something becomes painful to normalized, by tolerance or by reaching the threshold of a breaking point. This idea can definitely describe how something like fake news or radical ideologies in general can be perpetuated. William Sargent describes the phenomena that even Pavlov talks about in his speech. In his book, Battle for the Mind, he writes that dogs, much like human beings, break down when stresses or conflicts become too great for their nervous system to master. While in the speech even Pavlov gave, he talked about the Leningrad flood, and that the fact that the dogs almost drowned, and that once they recovered they showed an almost opposite response to stimuli and to people, such that the dogs showed an aggressive response to those that they cared for, and showed to be docile under the ones they used to dislike. Noted the 3 distinguishable phases, the first being the equivalent phase, in which the brain reacts the same to both strong and weak stimuli. The second phase, called the paradoxical phase, in which the brain responds more actively to weak stimuli than to strong. This reminds me of research done on those who have PTSD, in which there can be a trigger that could be worse than the actual thing. Then the last being the ultra-paradoxical phase, in which the conditioned responses and behavioral patterns, turn from positive to negative and vice versa. The idea of a mental breaking point. It's really fascinating. It always begs me to wonder if this could be the same tactic used to destroy individualism by cults. By deconstructing the self and deteriorating personality into a malleable Play-Doh, we can further understand this through the movie Guyana. During the beginning of the movie, we see that a few kids try to steal some food, because as was known later, many of the people in Guyana were starving since they actually could not grow anything in the field. Ironically and incorrectly, the kids are stealing some Kool-Aid. Once they are caught, James asks the people as to what they should do with them, and this is where I think a cult can foster the most growth, or how ideas grow bigger than they would have. Notice that the discipline of the group can feel more powerful than the discipline from the leader. The parents all cry out for James to punish them. People forget that the way groupthink works is almost by default. Research has even shown that cohesion created from in-group ties releases oxytocin. Ergo, creating a more relaxed and loving environment by existing in the in-group. This is something similar to what Michel Foucault writes in Discipline and Punishment, when public punishment used to exist. Seeing the punishment is implicitly acting on the punishment. The idea of silence is violence is definitely downgraded a lot from the concept explained by Foucault. We must be careful to accept snippets or sound bites as a prayer, since they may be effective, but they are missing a lot of context. But, back in the movie, we see that the kids get punished by snakes, drowning, and shocking, and they all ask for forgiveness from James Johnson. Once the kids are punished, then James Johnson catches some teenagers getting busy and punishes the young man by making him perform sexual acts on this buff guy. The whole scene really has exploitation written all over it. Around the halfway point, the White Knight is practiced. And this was actually not the first time that the White Knight was practiced. The first times, according to testimony, was actually done back when the church was in California. It may seem basic in nature, but the reinforcement through repetition is central to reaching the breaking point and inserting ideals here. So the deconstruction of the self can best be done by repeating things over and over. In the movie, James Johnson, aka Jim Jones, repeats, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Some certain sayings even carry the disdain for self or for the unraveling of the personality. Sayings like, "You are not of this world," or "The world belongs to the devil," or that everything is meaningless. All these can be found in the Holy Book. I don't want to imply that the Bible is at fault here or any holy book are at fault. Merely that there is a set of individuals, certain people that take things too far or too literal and to the brink of breaking. Jim Jones as a preacher could have just as easily stayed a preacher, but decided to create a convent of sorts and take on the role of the Christ, and did not just want to be considered the mouthpiece of God, but wanted to be the God that you would die for instead. We are not living in the worst of times, but we are not living in the best of times. We are sort of in a teenager state of society that has just been created through new communication methods. Here's where Jim Jones deviates from the totalitarian radical preacher to fascist. I do not use that term loosely, even though the term fascist has been used pretty loosely over the past few years.
What is fascism?
He wasn't a fascist because he didn't have a following in the cult. Like, at minimum, it has to be there's a charismatic leader and their followers do whatever they tell them. It's like a cult.
Okay, so this is exactly what I'm talking about, okay?
But like,
this is why we need. This is why we need.
No, but that's the very minimum.
And here's where we delve into lesson 3 of brainwashing. Lesson 3: reinforcing groupthink by activating the group. Collective nihilism or suicidal fascism.
Why should I have faith in a government that has deserted me and my family? And then with that mentality, people become open for conspiracy theories, for big lies, etc.
Death of a nation. A totalitarian takes over the life of all by controlling all parts of public and private life, which tries to include attitudes, morals, and beliefs of the people. The idea reminiscent of nationalism, but not entirely, with the difference remaining of a national ideology. Think Kim Jong-un. At the furthest extreme, we have fascism. Government is almost obsolete to fascism. A fascist leader drives the death energy, so always keeping the group active as a sort of loaded gun. Fascists have their people become bullets and they are ready to pull the trigger at any time. But in Jim Jones's regard, the bullet is pointing to the group itself. Hobbes spoke of the artificial man, which was the prototype of the body of man, known as the Leviathan. The Leviathan keeps growing, but instead of it being based on self-preservation, in this instance, it is based on self-destruction. The destruction then leaves the imprint on the ground, and the black shadows remain as more and more stories generate. The second half of the movie begins with Leo Ryan, who is named Lee O'Brien in this movie, who heads over to Guyana to check up on the People's Temple there. Congressman Ryan was a true investigator. Previously, he had spent 10 days at Folsom as an inmate to oversee the prison system from the inside. Here, the movie drags on, perhaps because this has become a sort of exemplar of death cults. So you are constantly waiting for the White Knight to arrive. As he interviews people, everyone says they love the convent, and James Johnson throws a huge party for him. And because Congressman Ryan never made it home to America, I don't think we'll ever know whether he felt like it was a facade or if it was real. Then somebody sends Lee a note that says that they want to leave. Once Lee confronts James about those people who want to leave, James decides to do something drastic and allow some of his cult members to take matters into their own hands. Now, during this decade, or during this time, journalists were considered very important, specifically from the Watergate scandal. So you notice that when they take pictures, it almost matches the caliber of the bullets attacking the congressman and the others. A few people die at the airstrip, and we are taken back to Johnsontown, aka Jamestown. And we finally reach the drinking of the Flavor Aid. At the very end of the movie, once the massive suicide occurs, when all the people are almost forced to drink the Flavor Aid or injected with poison. In Guyana Tragedy, you can see that they depict Jim Jones as a character study and almost tries to depict him as a hero of progressivism in the beginning, to then driving his character into sexual deviation and madness. But in this movie, Guyana Cult of the Damned, Jim Jones is almost a non-character, and the movie doesn't try to justify anything he did. Guyana Cult of the Damned, although exploitative in nature, I believe it didn't pull its punches, much like René Cardona Jr.'s other work, Tintorera. It depicts something that could have just as easily happened. Really, it seems like one movie the people committed suicide, and in the other one, the people were killed. But either way, when it comes to brainwashing, I believe that the group was definitely activated from the first White Night. I remember reading sociological papers on suicide bombers and studying conceptual frameworks, and how their altruism was extremely high. But by the time they had reached the event of the bombing, they had started to have second thoughts. In the tape recorded from the last moments at Jamestown, you can hear some of the hesitation from some of his churchgoers.
Is it too late for Russia?
This being said, there may have been much more force than we are led to believe in Guyana Tragedy, that more closely resembles Guyana Cult of the Damned. There's a personality assessment known as the Big Five Ocean Personality Test, which measures openness to ideas, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Contradictory to what you may believe or what may seem commonplace, research done regarding hypnotism and the Ocean Test has shown that people who score higher in openness are easier to hypnotize. So, if you are open to new ideas, you may just accidentally pick up some bad ideas along the way. Even from the readings I have done regarding neurotheology, you see there has to be a decrease in activity in the parietal lobe. During meditation and intense prayer, something happens at these times and people will feel like they are connected to everything and everything is them. From what I read, I also don't believe it's far-fetched to imagine ourselves being caught up in radical ideas. So in conclusion, because of the traits we've discussed, we must always remember to go outside and touch grass. So, stop doing those things. Stop watching Twitch or binging Netflix. Stop staying still. René Cardona Jr. may have pushed out exploitation films non-stop, but he at least tried something. So remember to take risks. Pick up something and go do it. The nihilism derived from the detachment of parasocial relationships will grow into something else when you realize that the world is out there.
If you are looking for what is in reality more real than reality itself, look into the cinematic fiction.
¿Qué onda, loquitos? Have you ever noticed that we speak in cutesy alliteration? Like illegal immigration, sewer socialism, paranormal preacher. We make rhetorically effective arguments with no substance, no alternative, and some anti-realist belief system. Here's where our discussion of exploitation films comes in. Exploitation films make me think of Twitch streamers.
Turn off the computer, ninja, all right? It's cyberbullying. Turn it off, walk the fuck away, go outside, eat some fucking grass, okay?
Let's take someone for example like Vosh, who's a leftist streamer who speaks on socialism. But to be honest, it's more like spark notes of socialism.
Feels good.
And the problem with that is that when something becomes so digestible to the point of being a candy bar, it's no longer nutritionally valuable for you. It really does more harm than good to be eating Snickers every day. Watching these streamers, you can get stuck in this bubble.
Do you need a second?
I think he's good to go.
And to be honest, all these deep dives got me feeling real homesick. I mean, I touch grass every now and then, but I think it's time to go home. ¿Qué onda, locos? 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 Oye, ¿qué onda, locos? ¿Qué onda, locos?
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow?
You made sure to counter everything I just said by saying that if I didn't like it,
Next up is the nostalgic brony.
Damn.
The most famous reactionist of them all.
Reactionists.
But not really.
You believe this shit? You believe this shit? You believe this shit?
Alright, loquitos. So before I begin, I kind of want to give a shout out to a person who created this shirt for me. There's Zenny Fox Designs. I was looking for a shirt that had like a little mole on it, reading Don Quixote on it. I think moles are pretty central to what I'm always speaking about, especially on the basis of wanting to be ordinary. Like that current show that's on Netflix named My Name. And the movie Himizu, the whole concept of a collectivist culture is really to want to be like everybody else. So, and I know it's a bit strange and random, but I actually think it highlights a lot of the collectivist principles that we talk about and just a lot of the stuff that we are going to go over in this episode as well. Lately, I've been thinking about what does it mean to be wholesome or authentic, honest, or even just ordinary. Today we're going to talk about Ataque de los Pájaros. But before we do, I kind of want to tell you a story. So I spent the first 8 years of my life living 1 block away from the train tracks. And I used to sleepwalk at least twice a week. My family say that they once found me just right across the train tracks, standing next to the train. My great-grandfather actually built a triad of houses to have the 3 daughters live next to each other, which they ended up doing. One of them was built in 1920, another one in 1899, and another in 1910. So I stayed with my grandmother for most of my life. And in some of the video in the intro, you get to see her old house. And we didn't get to go inside of it, but just know that the only large thing was the backyard. I think when I went to look into it on Zillow, it was actually just 500 square feet with about 5 of us living there. Yeah, 500 square feet for 5. It was pretty interesting. It was nice. But then I lived in Section 8 with my dad, and we spent a long time jumping from house to house and school to school, and pretty much walking everywhere. I think that's where I got the prototypical grandfather lifestyle. You know, I used to walk 2 miles to school and 2 miles back. And it seems like lifetimes away from having a corporate job and creating and editing YouTube videos. I know this may all seem tedious, but I think it needs to be said. There's meaning in the minutia. We don't always need to take everything so serious all the time. Just like exploitation films. And in this instance, Birds of Prey, it doesn't take itself at all serious. So, if there's anything you take away from this, just try not to take anything too serious on the internet especially. So let's delve into our next discussion about another of René Cardonia's famous exploitation films.
El ataque de los pájaros.
Beaks the Movie or Birds of Prey. You can find Ataque de los Pájaros on YouTube, and you can find Beaks the Movie on Tubi. Essentially, they are the same thing. Beaks is on Tubi, but it is missing like the first 10 minutes. Beaks, I feel, was written for more of a grindhouse audience, since it begins with people literally slamming, shooting, and killing birds. Pigeons, to be exact. I saw that one first, and it was lacking the part in Cusco and Machu Picchu, as well as the other part with the people on the airplane discussing extraterrestrials and starmen.
Extraterrestres. Puede ser.
Which was actually my favorite part. Let's begin with the concept of trash cinema. Now, if the creator from The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling, ever saw the shit that is on cable, he might just become a nihilist.
This, I think, stems from the fact that the networks have forever thought of an audience as some kind of mongoloid personages with IQs and negative figures who cannot retain any kind of close association unless they are thrust into the maelstrom of familiar names week after week after week. It simply doesn't sustain legitimate drama when you write about one guy week after week.
Perhaps, there's nothing original anymore. But then again, this may be a bias of mine. I respect Twilight Zone more than any other show. Episodes like that one that's exactly like that Disney movie. Just like they say Final Destination being based on the 2 Twilight Zone episodes, 22 and The Hitchhiker. Maybe I just wonder how far inspiration really stretches.
Like, what is that, dude? It's no fucking secret. I bought a house, it was $8,000.
Yeah, wait, this person is making fun of me.
Like, what makes Beaks so much more different than Birdemic as a criticism? Or what makes Twilight Zone different than Alfred Hitchcock Presents? Or any different than reading Edgar Allan Poe? Exploitation films can really range, from frustrating to fun.
Tells me this could be my lucky night.
A good example of a plain Jane bad exploitation movie is like Rob Zombie's Halloween. Definitely sleepy stuffs. Whereas Beaks can be a fun watch. Besides the rude nature to the pigeons, of course. Okay, let's get on with it. Beaks the Movie is a movie about the birds. Deadly, random, pissed off birds. The movie is directed by the Mexican king of exploitation films, René Cardonia Jr. He begins the movie in a fucking trash site. Then this hunter shoots some pigeons and some other guy slams them to the ground, and then a man shoots the pigeon with a blindfold on. At this rate, you can clearly see why the pigeons would want to kill everybody. The movie consists of 2 main characters, Vanessa, who is a TV reporter, and Peter, her cameraman boyfriend.
Lo siento, amigo. Tal vez la próxima vez, eh?
Vanessa is the actress Michelle Johnson, which was Kim from The Love Boat. And Peter is Christopher Atkins, best known for his role as the brother in Blue Lagoon. Also some side characters whose main purpose is to get killed and attacked by birdos. From a technical perspective, directing is pretty simple, and a bit fun, like when the man in the plane gets attacked by the birds. But there are moments in the movie where the directing gets a bit boring and a bit strange, like when the camera work shifts from Peter's recording and sometimes to switching to being just a third person. The camera work is definitely strange. I don't have any idea how they made this distinction. I also don't have any idea how they got the pigeons to get on people.
When swarms of pigeons are thrown at our actors.
Which makes sense because sometimes they look like they're tossed.
Oh my god, they're just throwing birds on them!
I also feel like the edits stop and start the movie so much it feels entirely disconnected.
España, Italia, San Juan.
Beaks definitely drags on, but I really do believe the repetitive music is what makes it unbearable. The music is horrid. It's ear-piercing to the point of soothing you to sleep, like holding a string chord for minutes straight. In this movie, I think there's something interesting about media and collective insanity. No, not like politically. In my perspective, at least.
Why, you're getting nervous, man.
For example, I'm sure there will never be another moment in time where the theory of ancient astronauts will be perpetuated ad infinitum, like we got during the time of ancient alien days. Just copy and paste Chariot of the Gods over and over and over. And conspiracy theory of the late 90s and early 2000s. I've studied a lot of this magical nonsense and love it. From ley lines to the New World Order to David Icke's reptilian theory.
This vibrational compatibility means that these reptilian entities who operate just outside of human sight, or at least can project themselves in a way that we can't decode them.
To geomancy even. This was all before Alex Jones, of course.
Come on over here. Come on over here. No, you flip me off. Come on, coward. No. Come on. You're not an intellectual. You're a fake and a fraud.
Birds can honestly be pretty terrifying when we really think about it. The movie Beaks is slowed down so much, I think if we were to speed it all up, I think the movie would be about 10 minutes. After the birds attack for about 50 minutes, the movie then follows the prototypical flow chart of exploitation films, which is to show women in bikinis and rich dude in robe as the boss. Vanessa tries to warn him about the shit going on, and he refuses to take it serious. Vanessa decides to get the whole town into a train, which is said to be the representation of modernism. I don't know about that. And then the birds attack the train. Throughout the film, there is said to be a lot of symbolism, but if I'm truly honest, I just don't see it. I just see a decent exploitation film, at least the long version is. The version known as Beaks on Tubi is missing the portion in Peru, which I feel is central to the jokish nature of the movie. This is where I will be honest and say I don't take anything
we get up to no good being goblins
too seriously.
They started without us?
That's it!
Dave! Stop!
Ian, where are you?
Chapter 2. Relative Freedom and the Not-So-Serious War Machine. Absolutely or relatively? Like with absolute or relative poverty, or with absolute and relative freedom. We tend to blur the lines in America. We have that leeway. In the movie Beaks, we see the birds attack the humans, but only insofar that the humans attack the birds first, by shooting them, smashing them to the ground, flying in their face literally, caging them up and breeding them up for consumption. Is relative freedom good enough, the pigeons probably ask? Are we really free to choose? If so many of us were on food stamps, did we have the choice of good food if parents chose for us bad food? This is central to the political thesis of freedom. Freedom is also to make choices that can hurt. Some strong advocates of veganism, like perspective philosophy, would say that we should all stop eating meat, and that would do the most good. But the constant resilient statement is that of Vosh.
There is positive utility, because as much as this sounds like a cop-out, eating a steak does contribute positive utility to the world because it's tasty. That is a real thing.
So, this could be one explanation as to why the birds attack. Or maybe they were trying to go for human depopulation, much like Henry Kissinger's 1974 Food and Drug Act. Back in the movie, after the whole town is in the train, the birds break in and attack everyone. But people escape into another car, and some Che Guevara-looking guy throws a fucking grenade and explodes the car with the birds in it. Then the battle with the birds takes a break. The movie ends with everyone who was hiding ending up being safe. And Vanessa on TV saying that perhaps the birds stopped because they didn't think they could be the most cruel killer of all. Men. To beat you over the head again with the message of masochism. I joke, but it is a bit too ham-fisted for me. I believe in the message subtlety as the king in these instances.
Great cinematographers really enable us to to think in visual terms.
That's just my opinion. Beaks ends almost abruptly with some shots of a body of water and then blackout. But Ataque, the long version, ends with the prophecy of Joel, which is even funnier. After reading on the nomadic war machine and the possibility of the birds representing the attack on modernism, I couldn't convince myself that that's a good message with this movie. Truth be told, I believe René Cardona was just having fun at the expense of Alfred Hitchcock, which would explain his other film like Cyclone. As far as lines of flight goes or deterritorialization, different rhizomes, I couldn't see the connection here either. Perhaps I believe in fun, and that's what this film is. A minor inconvenience and a little bit of fun. It even won Best of the Worst in Red Letter Media.
Beaks was Best of the Worst. It only seems appropriate to destroy Python 2.
And the reason this video is dedicated to authenticity is derived in the fact that we know one does not look like the other. You can't honestly say to me watching an IHE video and watching a React channel is the same thing. There's something offered in one instance, which is why I think Beaks is so bad.
I'm a journalist, not a sideshow barker.
And Ataque is decent. Ataque is trying to give a reason as to why the birds the movie happened. But Beaks has nothing to offer except its gore and bad editing. Criticism takes time, passion, a little insanity, and care for your product. When someone streams a live reaction, whether educated or not, they do not offer the same thing as the other. I'm not saying you need to take your criticism so serious, but you do need to do good where you can do good, and ridicule where you can ridicule. And nobody can say right things 100% of the time. That's why YouTubers edit.
Plagiarism is an act of fraud. It involves both stealing someone else's work and lying about it afterward. But can words and ideas really be stolen? According to US law, the answer is yes.
To end this off, I have to say, an interesting parasocial friend of the 90s spoke out a few weeks ago. Maybe it's a few months ago now. Steve from Blue's Clues came out and spoke to a bunch of millennials. And it's interesting to see the people's reactions. They were crying for no apparent reason. Almost like there was a total removal of the veil between reality and TV. And they believed that Steve was their friend. The exploitation of human loneliness, I think, really exemplifies the fact that there's so much exploitation films out there, so much exploitation media out there, that we no longer call it by its name. We no longer call it exploitation. We just call it media. I'm not trying to make fun of this, but I am saying that perhaps the parasociality element of Blue's Clues interacting, pseudo-interacting in that case, with his audience has derived this sort of attachment disorder. And maybe it's like a parasocial attachment disorder. And I'll tell you the truth, this movie is absolutely terrible, but relatively good. I suppose if I compare it to eating garbage. Now, René Cardona did a whatever job. And sometimes, very rarely, the movie is so bad it's good. I guess I just feel bad for the pigeons too. From my understanding and research, and from an uncle I had nicknamed TP, chicken slaughterhouses were legit the worst place to work possible. He worked for years, and when he came back, he was not the same. He was all messed up in the brain. And anytime you offered him chicken, he would get fucking pissed. I think if you have the option and money to do good, then you should be doing good. To conclude, fun is often downplayed as a cartoonish childish wish, or longing as an adult, but to play really is the central nature of fun. Create something ordinary. It doesn't need to be extraordinary. Our greatest role and goal in analyzing and perceiving is to create concepts that are consistent. Since there is no external as there is in science, creating consistency is the goal of philosophy. We don't need to be right all the time. We just need to be consistent.
Witness a certain seductive scene. Then you are shown that it's just a fake, stage machinery behind, but you are still fascinated by it. Illusion persists. There is something real in the illusion, more real than in the reality behind it.
Capitalism.
No. Well, maybe.
Les Mexicains sont trop strong. On ne peut pas les dompter. Ils vont s'américaniser parce qu'ils peuvent. Après, ils vont mexicaniser les Américains.
When the postmodern movement is adopted for everything, then the counterculture becomes over the counterculture. So-called radical ideas are everywhere, making them not so radical anymore. From squares to circles, from structures to processes. Let us deviate our mind away from structures onto processes. This allows us to analyze in a more empathetic framework. ¿Qué onda, loquitos? I have an honest question. Can you forgive and forget? Is it possible? Do you need to forgive in order to forget? And do you need to forget in order to forgive? You gotta sink to swim. Art is hard. It can be good, great, amazing, gross, therapeutic like this machine that examines our constant damage control in life. From Jodorowsky's interview in Forced Exposition, he says, I ask of film what most North Americans ask of psychedelic drugs. The difference being that when one creates a psychedelic film, he needs not create a film that shows the visions of a person who has taken the pill, rather he needs to manufacture the pill. The last film included in the Mexican cinema of darkness may be the most important in the conversation. We are talking about a movie that signifies the oppression of cultural and of the motherly love, and how we are the hands of the past pain. Motherly love in the shape of an elephant. Now, I did not know in the exact structural form, but I suppose in my subconscious layer, I knew what these colors meant somewhere inside of there. The Mexican flag's colors and symbols each stand for something. Red stands for the blood of the revolution and the heroes that fought for it. The green represents the hope and the struggle for independence. The white represents the purity of the nation. In the same breath, we can say that the green represents independence from Spain. The white represents the Catholic religion. The red represents the union between the indigenous people and Spaniards. Santa Sangre is a psychoanalytical discussion. The movie based on the serial killer Goyo Cardenas, who murdered women and buried them in his front yard. Somewhat of a media star and considered one of the first serial killers in the spotlight of Mexico. But the serial killer element may be secondary. Of course, at face value, this movie is on the description of American colonization. The battle within the self, of oppressed versus oppressor, or male versus female, skeptical of both sides, wishing the mother back while transforming into the father by force and floating through the asylum's walls. This is why the question of forgiveness is central to the movie's premise. Can you move forward? Can forgiveness work, or must there be retribution to eliminate the pain? Since we'll have a deep dive into meaning and myth, a quick character discussion is necessary. Well, the protagonist is Phoenix, who is the embodiment of a phoenix reborn or the eagle of the Mexican flag, the symbol that the Aztecs describe for Tenochtitlan. Phoenix is in limbo between Mexico and America. The ghost trapped as an orphan, the forgotten culture, the arms of the motherland, the lineage of cruelty. Then, Orgo, who is the parody of Uncle Sam or a symbol for America, the sadistic nation, as described through the young Phoenix's eyes when he sees his mom seduced by him. A sort of stepfather, you could say. I see him as the red of the Mexican flag. Concha is Phoenix's mother, who is seen as the leader of the Church of Santa Sangre, translated over to Holy Blood. She is an embodiment of the mother country, the representation of hope or independence. I see Concha as the green on the Mexican flag. Alma is the daughter of the tattooed woman. She is a mime who represents the innocence of childhood, as well as the silent spirit. I see her as the white of the Mexican flag, the tradition. Now the movie begins with our main character Phoenix in an insane asylum, perched atop a tree. He has a flashback to when he was younger, where we are introduced to the different colors of his life. This is where we meet Aladdin and Orgo. Aladdin is Phoenix's greatest friend, and Orgo is the ringleader. We are also introduced to the tattooed woman. The tattooed woman has a mute daughter whose name is Alma, or spirit. Alma is a mime. The tattooed lady then screams to Alma to walk through the rope on fire. Once Orgo enters the circus tent, the tattooed lady seduces him, and to display his male force, Orgo practices his knife throwing skills, to emulate sexual intercourse, of course. Phoenix sees all these things and realizes the ugliness of the Circo de Gringo. He goes on to kiss Alma's hand, and you see some young love begin to exist between the two of them. In the next scene, we really get introduced to Jodorowsky's directing style. During the behind the scenes, he discusses how he shoots scenes and remains malleable, to the point of changing the script and story to match with reality. When he was recording in Mexico, he recorded the real red light district, as well as some actual scenes of the poor. And while he was looking for an old soul song in Mexico, he came across a chorus group of blind individuals. Those who were there, he asked if they would join the movie. And they are the members of the Church of Holy Blood, with Concha as their leader. As we spoke of before, Concha is Phoenix's mother. Then a protest breaks out with the church members and the police over the demolishment of the church. A bishop or pope-like figure with his maroon robe appears to discuss the destruction of the church with Concha, as Concha describes how they came to worship the saint. A saint that has not been declared a saint by the Pope. The Pope is disgusted by the universalist perspective on Catholicism. The concept of liberation theology is also referenced in The Crime of Padre Amaro, since it was best known inside of Catholicism in Latin America in the 60s. The liberation theology that Concha and the members of Santa Sangre comes with the idea that their main saint is a woman who was tortured and killed by two men. The theology is defined by freeing the oppressed. The theoretical model can also be seen as humanitarianism or Marxist in nature, such as the group of 80 Christians for Socialism. This model also lends its way to a more matriarchic society. Concha then comes back to the circus to find Orgo flirting with the tattooed woman. She gets angry and Orgo takes her away. Jodorowsky indicated in interviews that the relationship between Orgo and Concha was similar to his parents, Orgo being his abusive father, and the mother who hates her son. Phoenix then sees his mother having sex with his father, which then leads to an elephant bleeding out, and Phoenix cries out for the dying elephant. Noted as one of the only animals that have matriarchs set up, the elephant has symbolized the death of femininity, or the death of the woman. Once the elephant dies, he is tossed into a landfill site and people show up to eat it. This is said to be another scene that was real. The son then becomes a father, by being tattooed an eagle. Concha catches the tattooed woman having sex with Orgo, and becomes extremely jealous, and spills acid on both of them while they are having sex. Concha then gets her arm sliced off by the knife-throwing Orgo. Orgo dies in front of Alma and Phoenix is trapped in the trailer while the tattooed woman and Alma leave. We move forward to where Phoenix is in the asylum, and the asylees have a night out in the red light district. We are in the perspective of Phoenix, so we see through his lens, similarly to the movie Voices with Ryan Reynolds.
Pretty complicated inside the human mind, huh?
It was you that killed me, Jerry. You.
Okay, that's true, but in a certain sense, it wasn't me.
Then, he sees his armless mother outside. He escapes and becomes the extension of his mother, having plays to where he acts like her arms, his body is an extension of hers. Considered the invisible man, he is the masochist finding pleasure in patience, or in the suspension of waiting. Phoenix kills women but is doing it as his mother's arms. First, Phoenix kills a woman who is interested in him. The mother speaks into Phoenix's ears and tells him to kill her. He then goes into a store and sees Santa, a sort of anti-version of El Santo, and a snake comes out to epitomize his erection. Once he takes Santa home, he shows her his play, only to try to kill her because the mother keeps chanting for him to do it. Alma then comes back into his life and rescues him from his mother, or rather himself. Alma being the silent spirit who is willing to accept death at the hand of her true love, and because of such, Phoenix cannot find himself to kill her. We get a beautiful rendition of a plastic mother, very similar to the scene in Dead Silence.
Person to get along with in the past, but I've changed. Jamie!
Where we realize that the father was just a makeshift puppet. The mother doll is the shell of a culture that once existed for Phoenix. Once Phoenix is finally free, he becomes arrested by the police. His first free act is his last. As Marcuse noted, liberation is therefore followed by a better domination. From domination to the father, church to society. While El Topo shows social liberation is for the illumined personality, Santa Sangre shows the redemption of the soul is tied to social liberation to the masses.
If you ever want to know how to not waste time, just
travel. Traveling is never a waste of time. So if you have absolutely nothing going on, just travel someplace. If you have no great distance to travel, just take a walk down the street to the corner store and find an adventure, because that's where life happens. It's when you're just moving about in this space and you're forced to interact with other things moving in the same space. And that's never a waste of time.
The rain had started tapping on the window near my bed.
Waking up from the nightmare of history. In the book, Mexican Cinema of Darkness, Doyle Green writes in the conclusion that these films and their respective degenerate utopias do not suggest a way out of the nightmare of history. If anything, history can only be a reoccurring nightmare. We are not where we used to be. YouTube is not the same place it used to be. From utopia to dystopia, from access to control, from freedom to communism, from redemption to repression, these are the repeating perspectives derived into something like Brave New World or 1984. The sort of lost futures that are spoken of by Mark Fisher or Slavoj Žižek. But let's not drown in this nihilism. Life is a process, not a structure. Don't let yourself be skewed by ideology. If you open your mind into inconsistencies, it allows you to understand and have a more empathetic framework. And if you really believe in your ideas, you should be able to hold your ground at them. The red pill versus blue pill society really only feeds a pharmaceutically addicted one that can somehow think they know more than others. I dream and make believe. There is no explicit culture, only an implicit one. There is nothing transcendent in culture. There is no other. And when the secrets are finally said, we can push past these self-fulfilling prophecies. You are not a ghost. Don't fade away. There is no reason for your suffering that I can give. But your wants should not be pushed to the wayside. Do not want less. It's not Chicanos versus Mexicanos, just a reoccurring dream of the earth. Forgive and forget. The latter's probably more important than the former. So I started forgetting things. One can say capitalism is the system of death and nihilism is the worldview of death. But do not become less of you to have more of it. Quit chasing a ghost. That's just the mirage of happiness and fulfillment. Do not deny your life and go live it. Then once you have, come back home and become living again.
私はのりこ。